Hi guys, welcome to today's tutorial. In today's tutorial, we'll be learning about CSS Flexbox. Buckle up and let's start the tutorial. What at all is Flexbox? So Flexbox is a shorthand for flexible box layout in CSS, which is a layout system that allows us to build responsive and flexible layouts. Before this introduction or the introduction of Flexbox, we had to, or developers had to style or move elements about using floats to be able to position them. So you can use floats and you use right, you use left. That was how we used to position our items. But with the introduction of Flexbox, positioning became very easy. The name suggests what it does. So we'll start to know some ways that we can use CSS Flexbox and how intuitive we can make our projects using this Flexbox. So let's get into today's video. All right. Before that, I would like to also talk whilst I do this. Well, there are a number of things that we can use Flexbox for. Like anywhere in your website, you can decide to use Flexbox because Flexbox can allow you to do so many things at once. But there are some elements that do not work with Flex, so we'll get to know in this tutorial. I'm going to set two child elements. So this is the parent element, which is given container. So the class container, the child element, I'm going to set them to box, and I'm going to give them one. So I want three child elements, so three children. I'm going to do times 3, then create them. I'm going to make the classes unique. So class 1, 2, and 3. Alright. Now let's get into our CSS and style our boxes. So I already have this code, and what this code does is this will allow me to remove any default margins and patterns and set the box size into a border box, which if you've watched my previous videos, you're going to know what it does. So border box will actually prevent oversizing. So if my size is supposed to be 100 and I add patterns and margins to my box or my div, if I add to them some patterns and margins, it's not going to add or subtract from our already existing size. So that is the effect of box size and border box, right? And this is just to give the background this color. So we'll go ahead and continue the styling. So container, we'll go ahead and give container a width of 100%, height of 100%, so 100 dynamic viewport height, and we're going to go ahead and give it a border so that we can see it. I'm going to do it 3 pixels solid gold, and I'm going to do it golden rod. Okay, let's go with gold for now. All right, now I want to make this resizable because I will be dragging and drop, like dragging it to show you how the responsiveness of Flexbox is like. I would like to do that. Some might not like to do that, so I'm going to add the CSS property resize, and I'm going to resize in both axes. Once I'm done, I'm going to do overflow. I'm going to do auto so that I can have my resize here. So now I can resize this element anyhow I want. All right. Then we can go on and style the child element or the children. So those are boxes. So I do dot box. So the selectors here, these are called selected. The dot that I'm using this for the classes. So when I hover, you can see we have class box. So we are selecting all classes with the name box and we are styling them. I'm going to go ahead and style it, give it a width of 200 pixels, another height of 200, and I'm going to give it a color. So background color, I'm going to choose golden rod. Once the golden rod is set, we're going to go ahead and give them some border. So border, and the border should be 2 pixels and solid. So that will set the border to black. But it says they're not working because I named them box 1, box 2, and box 3. Box 2, box 3. Alright, so now it should start working. Alright, so we can see our elements. Now I would like to put some numbers here so that we can be able to identify them easily. Alright, back to our CSS. Now I'm going to do display flex, justify content center, align items center. All right, we are going to do font size 30 pixels so that you can see. All right, so now we have the first, second, and third. So if I say first, you can see this, second is this, third is this. All right, now to be able to use the flex property, to be able to use it just like I've used below here, I'm going to go ahead and show you how you're going to do that. So as I've used here, display flex, that is what you have to do. You have to specify your display flex property. So display flex, and the shorthand for VS Code is DF, and it gives you that. Once you do display flex, now your elements are positioned in the row manner or in the row columns. What is a row? A row is necessarily normal rows we know, so a horizontal space. So yes, so the x-axis is a row, is a kind of row coordinate. So this is the row. So for Flexbox, we have cross axis and the main axis. So the main axis is controlled this way, that is the row side, and the cross axis is called columns. So you can also set your items to behave the way they were aligned this way. So we can do flex direction, and that will be column, and it will set our items back to the way they were. That is how to use this property. So we use column, and it resets our direction or our axis. Main and cross axis are now this way and that way. So the main axis and the cross axis, because we will get to know that in a few seconds as we dive through our tutorials. So the direction the items flow are called the main axis, and the cross axis are the direction that the items are perpendicular to. When you say perpendicular, they form 90 degrees. So it means to the x-axis, they form 90 degrees to the x-axis. So that becomes our cross-axis if they are facing column-wise. But if they are facing row-wise, let me change this to row. And if they are facing row-wise, then the direction the item flows is the main axis. So this is now our main axis, and now we have this perpendicular axis making 90 degrees with it. So wherever the items flow, remember it's your main axis. So our main axis can change when we change to column and rows. So now this becomes our main axis. All right, let's go ahead. Now that we know how to style using the flex direction, let's learn something about some other flex items. We'll be learning flex, and we will do some other things with this direction that we just learned. So we have others called row reverse. What this will do is to reverse the structure of our element in the row direction. Now you can see that the space is here. At first the space was behind and the items were from 1 to 3 here. So it reverses it. You can do column reverse, and the way it used to be the column now is reverse the order, and we start from bottom to top. That is how this works, and these are the 4 ways you can use. Let's go on ahead to other element that we can use to style our flex. So we have other elements called the justify, that you can see here. So justify content will justify or set the items based on the main axis. So along the main axis, we justify our content. So anytime we have a main axis, this is our main axis now because we are in the row column or the row flex direction. So flex direction row, we now can set our, or we now have our set direction in the row. So our justify content is going to set it based on that. Let's see. So when we say justify content, justify content, we can say center, and we see that the spacing will be given to all the sides so that the elements can be centered. That is cool. What else can we do with this? We can also do something called baseline. And what baseline does is it will shift to where the flex starts. Flex starts here, there's center and there's end. We can also do end, and end is here. You can see we have the end here. So we start with the ending, can end it, we can start, we can also do other things like space around. When we say space around something, that means all the contents will get some spacing, but in between the contents we'll make sure that the spacing there are bigger. So the spacing in between contents are bigger. Now we can see that applied here. We can also do space between, and we'll push all the space in between the contents. So now the spaces are now placed in between the first and third content, while the second is locked in place. So we define the space around what items we have. That is the space between. So we push all the space to what is between the first and last content. That is how it's to be understood. All right. So we'll go ahead and style this again, and we have what is called space evenly. Evenly will go ahead and make all the spaces the same, unlike the space between, which will push all the space between the first and last element. Space around, which will make sure that at least between the first and last element, the spaces there are a lot bigger than the spaces around the first and third element. When I say first and third element, you can see them here. I mean, I'm using only 3 elements or 3 boxes. So the first and third boxes. I like elements a lot, right? This is what the justify does. And note that justify will always position the items on the main axis, and the main axis is always what we are flex directing on. So if I change the flex direction to column, you'll see that the direction changes and the space evenly is applied column wise. It's not applied row wise again. Now we have the spaces in between them like this, not like this. That is to be taken note of. All right. Now that we know this, let's move on to another element we call the align item. So let's clear this. So we'll do align items. Now what this one can do is also similar to what the flex can do. You can experiment with all these, but we are going to talk about a few because they are just the same. We're going to push, pull, and others. So baseline is still the same position like the starting line, and one center is going to position it on the axis that we will call the cross axis. So there's something called cross axis. So now that we are facing this way, this is our main axis and our cross axis is on the y. So now it's going to position it on the cross axis. Anytime we have a direction, so this is on the rule, so our cross axis is on the y. If we change the flex direction to flex direction column, it's going to position it in the middle because we've changed our flex direction to column. And that is how this works. When we change it to other things, like let's say we want to end, so position it down to the side. So it's going to the side now. If we were to be centered, we would have seen it's the centered style. So it would have been centered and positioned to the end of this. So we can also say flex end, and that will put it to the side. So we have all these flex start, flex end, flex this, flex that. All those are things that we can use. We can do flex starts, and it's going to position at the same place. That is cool. All right. So we can use this in conjunction with our justify to position items within our element or our div. So that is how it's supposed to be. And when we try to resize, we see that this is how it's going to be. All right, let's go ahead with our styling. So now that we know about these two, we're going to go ahead and learn another way that we can do our styling. We have something we call flex wrap. Yes. So what is flex wrap? Flex wrap will wrap our element. When we say wrap, so we have this div. This has a width of 100%, but at the moment, this div also has what we call the viewport width. So I've stringed this width, and we can see that the width has become smaller. So this 200, 200, 200, let's take this out, these out. I'm going to take these out for the meantime. These 200, 200, 200 can't all fix at once within our element. If they are to fit, let's say I'm doing row, we do row here and see how they will fit. They will squeeze one another, and once they squeeze one another, they are going to be like this, which is not ideal. So what we have to do is we have to flex them. When we do flex, can do flex wrap, do wrap. By default, it is set to no wrap. That is why they are flexing or they squeeze themselves together. Now that is set to flex wrap, you see that the third content has been moved. Now if I'm to resize again, you see that the second content will move. That is the flex wrap property. When your item shrinks, and the space here is too small to behold or hold this element, you see that it will move to fill another space. That is one thing about flex, and we can see it here. Let me resize and see. Once the space becomes enough to hold it, see that it will stay. But once the space becomes smaller, it just leaves and fills another space. All right, that is the flex wrap. All right, so once this is the flex wrap, this is what it does. We know what it does now. We're going to go ahead and learn another thing called the gap. So I'll remove flex wrap, and we're going to do gap of 10 pixels. Now notice something. Now we have some spacing between our element. So gap property will allow us to add spaces between our element, and it is added instantly. So without using margins and patterns as you would do always. Gap, when you use display flex or grid, you can use gap for your element styling. So it gives any amount of spacing you want to give. 100 pixels will give it 100. Any amount of spacing will be added to it, despite whether it will shrink or not. That is the thing that we all the benefits of gap. All right, so we learned another one that is called flex grow. Flex grow is a property that will allow elements to be positioned. So that one we applied to the child element. All what we did was apply to the parent element, which is container. I'm sorry I didn't say it in the beginning, but all what we did is to be applied to the parent container. But if you want flex grow, you can add flex grow to your child container. Say this first div number one, I want it to grow, so I'm going to do box overwriting the CSS as it's here, and I can set flex grow to 1. And let's see something here. You see that it will grow more than its siblings. See, as the weight expands, it grows more than the siblings do or the siblings will do. So it's collecting all the weight to itself and not allowing anyone here to have the weight. Flex grow is for allowing our content to suck up or take up the space that is left. So any space that will be left within our website, within our div, is going to be accumulated by this first element here. So the first box will take that space because of flex group 1. Now there's another one that I would like us to learn. So we've learned, so this flex grow will also allow it to grow dependent on the number of way you specify. So the number you specify 2 will allow it to grow twice as much as the others will grow. So it grows twice as much, and you can see it's growing twice as much as the others can. To grow twice as much, like twice. That is the essence of flex grow. Alright, so now we can also do one thing called flex shrink. I'm going to apply to the same element, then we'll see how it's done. So flex shrink. Maybe I don't want to shrink my element, so I do 0. If I do 0, that means the element shouldn't shrink at all. Let's go ahead and shrink our div and see. It's not shrinking. While the others are shrinking, that one alone is there. It's not shrinked. It's just because the size has decreased that it is hidden. It's not shrinked. It is the overflow property that is allowing it. Let's go. And you see that it is not shrink at all. It is just hidden. So that is it. When you set it to 0, it says that please don't shrink at all. Anything that happens to you, stay the same. Maintain your height and your width. But it becomes fun when you say flex shrink should be 1. That means at all times you should shrink more than usual. So it will shrink and shrink and shrink more than usual. So we can set that one to the number that you specify is what is going to shrink. So you see that now they are all bigger than this one because I'm saying it should shrink 3 times than any of its siblings. So let me refresh so that you see that it has shrunk twice the size of its siblings. So when I keep resizing to keep shrinking than its siblings and to shrink and shrink till it can't shrink anymore. That's it. So that is the flex shrink property. Now let's learn another element called the flex basis. And that one, to use it, we can only apply it to the parent element to set a default star or a default width. So a default size to our object defines the initial size of our items. So flex basis. So let's say I set it to 250. You can say 350 pixels now. And flex basis, because I have the width already, so I'm going to apply. So that is for flex basis. Flex basis. It just will give us our initial size. So we use to set the initial size of the divs or your element. Alright, so we're going to learn about another thing, and that one is called a shorthand flex. And how does this work? Flex is a shorthand for all the properties that we have here. Flex, it works this way. So we have the grow property, grow, and now it has the shrink property, shrink. No, shrink, yes. And then we have the basis. So you can specify all at once using this flex shorthand property. So you can see when you hover, you see that it's saying grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. So yes, that is what it does. So you can say that for our element, we want this flex grow to be 1 and flex shrink 1 and the initial size to be 200 pixels. And that's how it's going to be. And we can also go ahead and use that here. You can say flex. And when we say flex, you can add 1 and you see that it's going to grow. So it's growing, it's shrinking, it's growing, it's shrinking all at once. So you can see that it can grow, it can shrink, it can grow, it can shrink at any point in time. So depending on what the property or the current state of our window is or our device width is, we will have this either shrinking or growing. So it's either grows or it shrinks. That is the flex property that we have here, the flex shorthand. Well, we've learned a lot, and one thing I would like to use is or let you know is what we call the order, right? So order will allow us to change the way our items appear here. Say I want this one to be the last item, I can just set it to order third, and you see that it distorts the order of our items. It distorts the order of our items, and once the order is distorted, it becomes difficult to work with the styling because it makes it a bit weird. So let's say I want to do justify content center. See, it makes it a bit jagged. It's difficult to work around it. So I'll recommend that you don't play with order, but it's still a property that you can use. All right, that is it, and I hope we've learned something from the tutorial. One last thing I would like us to learn about is align self. So once we use the flex wrap, we can use align self for each element. So align self, we say align self, and we can align it dependent on any. Can say center, and we see that that one alone will align itself center. We don't have to specify any other, like only that one will move out of its way to align itself. So this is the first box, and the first one has aligned itself perfectly. Nothing more, nothing less. We see it done. So this is the Flexbox tutorial. In under 30 minutes, you learn Flexbox and all that it has to offer. We can use it for many things. And one thing I would like to clear is some misconceptions, some things that we mostly get wrong with Flexbox. So Flexbox will allow you align your items, build responsive layout, but At the same time, if we don't take care, we will use Flexbox on items that do not allow flexing. So some items do not allow flexing, and we have to take note of that. Sometimes we do display flex and it's not working because some items do not support flex, right? And using Flexbox as a two-dimensional layout, no, it's not two-dimensional. If you want to use a two-dimensional layout, mostly choose grid. So that one too, you can only get it by setting display to grid. If you set display to grid, see, it becomes like this. So that is grid. Grid is a two-dimensional layout work that will allow you to be able to position your elements on your screen. All right. And applying flex properties to non-flex elements, as I said, is something that is very, very, very notable. So please, I've repeated it again, don't apply flex on elements that do not need flex. All right. Sometimes people forget that there is flex wrap that can allow us to do awesome things like this. Flex wrap, and we can have awesome things. So we set it to wrap and can do awesome things. When we remove this flex here, can do a lot. We can see it's still positioned in the center while the others are moving about. So that is it. Right. So thanks for watching today's tutorial, and I would like us to leave a thumbs up, like this video if you learned something from it, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more informative content like this. I'll catch you up in the next tutorial. Bye bye. Peace out.